Hello, BookTube. Well, here we are. This is my promised post on good writing tips. But in writing, as in so much else in life, it's important before you get to the good tips to get rid of the bad tips that might be clogging up the system, whether it's horseback riding or martial arts or golf or acting or anything. We accumulate bad habits if we're not careful, and they can get in the way of good habits. So before I get to my good writing tips, I thought I would dispel some of the more popular bad writing tips that you will encounter. Uh, I noticed these while I was going around BookTube looking at tips for writing videos, and the first bad tip is by far the most common one of all, and that is show, don't tell. The bad writing tip that says that it's weak of you to describe someone's emotional state or their emotional reaction to something or something like that, as opposed to signaling it with dialogue and action scene. And my perfect response to this is, says who? Like, it would take me a whole day just to list, not discuss, just to list the great works of literature that are perfectly happy showing and not telling. Show, don't tell as a maxim would summarily remove from library shelves half of Edith Wharton, half of Anthony Trollope, half of Charles Dickens, great heaps of Japanese literature. I'd probably be left with 25 random pages of George Eliot. It's an old rule, I know. It's been promulgated for a long time, but I think the reason that it's been embraced so fervently in recent years is because it's a YA rule. It's not only much harder to do a good job showing rather than telling, but it's also harder for lazy or young readers to read showing as opposed to telling. And that's one of the main reasons why this bad tip, should be dispensed with right away. The key is not show, don't tell. The key is show well. And that brings us to bad tip number 2, which is kill your darlings. Some variation of kill your darlings. And that is the bad tip that says that when you're finished writing a passage or page or a chapter, you should ruthlessly excise the parts you have written that you like. I would add here on the assumption that, but in all the years that I've been alive, I have never been able to understand what the assumption is that would make that good advice. Like all kinds of open masochism, it should be deeply, deeply suspect. It's if you're writing something and it's firing your instincts and fully engaging you, how on earth does it follow that when you're done, that thing will then be bad and that you won't have known it? How does it follow that you suddenly become the worst judge of prose, yours or anybody else's, on the face of the earth? No, again, I say, says who? And there's a ready answer. I know this maxim's been around for a long time, but most of the people who say it most readily today are freelance editors, writing seminar instructors, people who are financially dependent on making writers distrust the instincts and the drive that made them writers in the first place. You can edit your darlings, absolutely, refine them, absolutely, but summarily remove them just because you like them? Utter nonsense. Don't do it. And that brings us to bad tip number 3, which is simplify. Also been around for a long time. Never use a long word where a short one will do. Never use a complex word where a simple one will do. It's obviously related to bad tip number 2. But again, it's at heart a YA tip. Said is not the same thing as explain. And explain is not the same thing as elucidate. All three have long and viable histories as words in the English language. The key here is not to strip your vocabulary to the level of freshman in high school. It's to learn how to adroitly use all the words. Instead of scanning your prose for anything with 3 syllables, you should be bearing down with practice and hard work to learn when it's exactly right to use elucidate instead of said. And that brings us to bad tip number 4, which is to avoid the passive voice. It's a small one, but it's persistent. So you never want to say the car was driven by him if you can say he drove the car. And once again, I say, says who? The passive voice, if it were indeed totally useless, utterly redundant, a betrayal of everything that English language stands for, it wouldn't have survived in English for 1,000 years. It wouldn't exist in all the other languages that have been around for 7,000 years. It's wrong to simply avoid it on a point of dogma, just as all points of dogma are wrong. The key is to use it well. Bad tip number 5, the last one that we'll do today, is write what you know, which is the tip that says you should draw from your direct experiences rather than try to extrapolate. You should make art out of your direct experiences. And, out of all the bad tips on writing that I've seen online, this one annoys me the most because it strikes at the very bedrock of writing, which is imagination. I have seen this all the time, not just in beginning writers, but also in published writers of good standing. I read one once in his acknowledgments who said that he couldn't write a certain scene set in the winter in Montana until he had bought a plane ticket and gone to Montana in winter. Utter cowardly nonsense. Imagination enables writers to write more convincingly about things they don't know than people who aren't writers can write about things they do know. And this rule wants the writers to abandon it and stick to what they know. No. It makes no sense at all. If you're a writer, what your job is to make me believe that you know anything. No matter how you do it, whether by research or by simple linguistic virtuosity, but write what you know. Stick to the overnight shift at the warehouse. Where would writing be if anybody followed that tip? And there you have it. Those are the 5 worst bad writing tips that I have encountered online, and I've encountered them long before there was an internet. They are prevalent for a reason. They dumb the whole process down, and now that I've brought them to your attention, I hope you will consider eradicating them if you do them. If you follow these bad tips, you shouldn't. I want to give you 2, only 2 writing tips that are good. Now that you've got all the way to the end. And the first one of these tips is small. And that is to write what you like to read. Not what some imagined audience in the hypothetical future might like to read. That's where bad writing comes from. That's where sellout authors come from. You don't want to be one of those. Write what you want to read. Good writing creates its own audience. It doesn't tap into one that already exists. And we want to aim at good writing. And good writing tip number 2 is big, not small, and it is fundamental, and it is to write. I have lost count of how many people I've known in my life who called themselves writers and didn't give time to writing, never wrote, or almost never wrote, made it a precious, hyper-mystical affair that guaranteed they wouldn't have a word count at the end of the day or a week or a month. Don't be that kind of writer. Generate material. 5 pages every day. If you're serious about it, set aside the time, find the time, deny yourself other things, and do it every day without any failure, without any excuses, without any days off. If it means that much to you, if it's your calling in life, then that's what it deserves. But anyway, that's the number 1 tip that I've been giving people in workshops and classrooms and in person forever. Write. Take a piece of paper, take a tablet, take your laptop, and write every day. And there you have it. Bad tips and good. We'll get back to books tomorrow. Thank you, BookTube.